Now, Jason Miller, bless him, has been waiting very patiently. It's very early in Washington, D.C. We're very grateful to have him on the show. He's the former chief spokesman and senior advisor to Donald Trump. However, I understand, Jason, you're now back advising the Donald. Tell us, what's it been like working with him in recent times?
Well, I'm back for a third campaign. You can't go through the first two in 2016 and 2020 and then not come back for 2024. So excited to be back in a senior advisor capacity, and things are looking pretty good in the polls. So it looks like I made a good choice.
All right. So tell us, break it down for us. Obviously, we've seen everything that's been going on. Is it going to be a Trump versus Biden?
Absolutely. And so what we have here in the U.S. is it starts off at a state-by-state basis in the primary process, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. But then coming up on Tuesday, we have Super Tuesday, where you have 15 states that will all be going at the same time. And so at the end of Tuesday, President Trump should be at about 1,100 delegates. His chief rival should be at about 90 delegates, less than 100. And you only need 1,215 to get the majority and clinch the nomination. So he's right on the cusp, and then the general election starts.
OK, but what about all of these court cases? Is there a chance that President Trump could be imprisoned by the time that he starts to really start campaigning?
I have no concern, and there's no chance that anything happening on the legal front will impede President Trump's return to the White House. In fact, what you see with a lot of the surveys and the polling work that's been done is that a plurality, if not a majority, of Americans think that politics has a lot to play with these court cases. And as President Trump's lead over Joe Biden continues to grow, new New York Times numbers have him leading 48 to 43. Most Americans realize, OK, the piling on here that's happening, this is just politics.
But you're comfortable, are you, back working with Donald Trump after the January 6th riots, after the fact that he claimed that he had actually won the election that he actually lost? I remember talking to you about this for The Telegraph, and you were quite uncomfortable with his stance at that point. How have you managed to put that aside to now be back working for him?
Well, very simply, what we saw in 2020 is many of the rules were changed during the game. And just in 2016, we saw different efforts to try to stop President Trump. 2020, of course, we saw the social media censorship. There was the massive scandal over the Hunter Biden laptop that was covered up when it came up, and the New York Post story and others were censored. And so now as we look to 2024, really the legal challenges, the legal attacks have replaced those. But when it comes down to it, most Americans are looking and saying the country's going in the wrong direction. About 3/4 of the country think it's going in the wrong direction. And so Americans believe almost universally that they were better off with President Trump, and that's why he's doing so well. OK, but Jason, you don't agree with him that he actually won the last election instead of losing it, do you? Well, what I've said over and over is that I thought the 2020 election was legally rigged. And what I mean by that is that they've gone in, they changed the rules in an unconstitutional manner. They didn't go through the state legislatures. And so, again, they changed the rules in the middle of the game. So I'm not at all happy with how 2020 turned out. But I do think 2024 will be completely different. I think it'll be a landslide victory.
Really? OK, and what about the Capitol riots? How have you squared that circle? Because you can't have been happy about what happened on January the 6th.
Well, if Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, had taken the extra troops and National Guardsmen that President Trump had offered, then I don't think that would have happened. But unfortunately, it was a day that was not very good for our country. But I don't see something like that happening in the future.
Do you have a sympathy with the American public sort of facing a bit of a Hobson's choice? It's a man who could be facing a custodial sentence versus a man who can't seem to finish a sentence.
Well, when you look at Joe Biden, especially as we saw the contrast this week of both Joe Biden and President Trump at the border, President Biden does not look that good these days. And I think ever since the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, all of our foreign adversaries have been licking their chops, whether it's Putin, whether it's Xi. We see chaos in the Middle East and Iran feeling emboldened once again. And so Americans want to have that sense of deterrence return, not just for our country, but for the world stage. And they want a strong leader. Right now, inflation is just crushing the average American. They want a strong leader back who can return some actual sense of fiscal sensibility.
OK, but how will a President Trump times 2 handle Vladimir Putin. I mean, we heard what he said about those who weren't fulfilling their NATO spending pledges on defence. He was saying that basically they deserved to be invaded by the Russian president. It's not the best approach to to geopolitics, is it?
Well, need to go and split out a couple of things here. First of all, keep in mind, Putin invaded Ukraine during Obama and Biden, and now Putin has invaded Ukraine during Biden. During those 4 years of President Trump, we had peace, we had prosperity, not just with regard to Ukraine, but also with regard to the Middle East. But now everybody sees weakness with Joe Biden. Now, to the second point that you're bringing up regarding NATO funding and defending our allies, it's very critical that our allies meet the NATO threshold for defense spending as a percentage of their GDP. When President Trump first came into office, we only had about, I believe it was about 3 who were actually meeting the requirement, finished up at about 10 or 11. Now, more recently, additional countries have started to meet that 2% GDP threshold, but we need more. You have 31 countries in NATO. Everybody should be meeting their 2% GDP level.
But people who suggest that Trump returning to the Oval Office will mean that President Zelensky is out of Ukraine, what's the response to that? I mean, we understand that the Trump administration and indeed Putin have had a different relationship to, say, Biden and indeed Obama. I mean, that's a fact, right?
Well, I think one of the things is many folks are looking at this in the wrong perspective about how do you go and win a war? Who wins the war? Who loses war? But President Trump takes a look and says, how do we stop the killing? How do we get this conflict to stop? How do we make sure that we don't have more deaths? But you look at Ukraine. Ukraine has lost an entire generation with the deaths that have happened. All around Ukraine, cities are in rubble. But nobody is talking about how you stop the killing. And that's the problem right now is President Trump will get Putin and Zelensky together, and he will say this has to stop. He has pressure points for both of them. Nobody else, Camilla, is actually talking about how you stop the killing.
OK, briefly as well, Jason, how's Melania? Is she on the scene? Are we going to see her holding her husband's hand as he goes and hits the campaign trail?
Well, Mrs. Trump is very supportive of the president running for the White House once again. I think we'll see her more as we go into the general election. She's a very private person. Of course, their son, Barron, is a senior in high school, so he'll be going off to university in the fall. But I think we'll see more and more of the First Lady.
All right, Jason Miller, I'm really grateful to you because I know you've got up very early to speak to us on GB News. So thank you very much and good luck with the campaign.